boundaries, of course. And then we were also talking about, we're going to talk today about proactive interaction and some techniques for interaction with clients. And also talk about, did I get on the wrong slide? Oh my gosh, I probably gave her the wrong slide to start on. And I did. Sorry, Crystal. We're starting at, there we go. We're starting at 53, sorry. So we're gonna talk about proactive interaction. We're gonna talk about the crisis cycle. And we're going to kind of start to lean into what your duties are in a crisis. So with proactive interaction, proactive interaction is a concept to make you effective as a worker based on your ability to respond rather than react to what a patient's behavior is or the situation that you're in. So proactive interaction is a guide to responding so that the interactions results are functional, or they're in the positive, moving toward the positive of what you're trying to accomplish. And a primary goal of proactive interaction is really to build interpersonal relationships that can tolerate stress. So proactive interaction is used a lot of times in the conflict and working phase of relationships. These are the stages of the relationship where you cycle through multiple times. Mm-hmm. And so you want to have that interpersonal relationship that can still support communication and tolerate the stress of maybe an unforeseen or unforeseen event, a situation, or a trigger, if that makes sense. Okay, next slide. So proactive interaction is abbreviated into, has 5 phases, and it's abbreviated into RADAR. And so I always like to think of it when I'm in an office, when I'm in the community, when I'm in a meeting, even with other professionals, is that I have my radar going. So my radar is always on. So go ahead to the next slide, Crystal. We'll walk you through this, and I'll walk you through an example. So proactive interaction, stage 1 is recognition. So that is recognition that something is going on, that a trigger is present in their environment. It really uses all of our senses to become aware of how the other person's actions may be fitting into our environment. It also is just this gut subliminal sense that something is up. We react to foreign things in our environment, or we react to surprises in our environment. And so sometimes, you know, it's a surprise for both the client and you that something is happening, right? So, so I'd love to give this, I'd love to say that I instantly reacted or instantly recognized what was going on. But the example I love to give to this is that I was driving a PSR client through the community, and he was self-stimulating, and that was really disruptive to my driving. And before I knew it, I had blue lights in my mirror. Okay, so we were driving through, you know, a city corridor. I think it was Mark 25. We were headed towards his next activity, and I was going 30. And so, you know, instantly recognition, and you know, it's when you're being pulled over by the police, you're a real part of the interaction. But so is this kiddo that's sitting behind me. So next stage, Crystal. So the next stage is assessment, and this has to happen pretty quickly. You know, if my client, so looking at, you know, a lot of elements of the behavior, it might be the size of the person that you're dealing with, your client. It might be the speed that they're walking or talking. It might be their body language. So when I was pulled over, my little guy instantly started pummeling the back of my seat, which made it even more easy to stay in the assessment phase and really see what was going on with him. But he went from self-stimulating to pummeling the back of my seat. I looked at my environment. I realized I wasn't unsafe being pummeled in the back of my seat. So it wasn't time for me to, get up and redirect all my attention to my client. And I looked at them, are they ready to fight, flight, or freeze? So luckily, he was strapped into a car seat, but he was definitely showing some fight, some fear reaction with the pummeling of the back seat of the car. So there's recognition, and then there's this quick assessment, right? All right, next one, Crystal. So here's decision, right? You have to choose the most appropriate response. It could be a non-physical response. So interpersonal communication, please would you stop pounding the back of my seat? Conflict resolution or management, general physical, I could have shifted my body around to the back and controlled, put the child in more control. Or a specific physical response, like a block, or if there was a threat to me, obviously maybe grabbing his hand as he was pummeling the backseat of my car. But I have to choose that most appropriate response. It may be just conflict management and resolution. And so that's what I chose. Because in general, non-physical and general physical responses are used except for when there's a safety threat. And no matter how irritating it was to have the backseat of my car pummeled, it was not a safety threat for me, and it was not a safety threat for the officer that was now approaching my car. So you're seeing how fast this is happening in my mind, right? All right, next slide, Crystal. So my decision was to proceed in talking with the officer and being prepared that there might be some unexpected consequences for that. My decision was to ignore the young man's behavior for a period of time, as it wasn't unsafe, and merely redirect him verbally. Although I would say, after redirecting him verbally 2 or 3 times, that was not going to work. So I did give up on that option. So I rolled out my window and I began talking to the police officer. And at that point, the child that I was caring for began pounding on his window. So I immediately went back to the first part of radar. And was this dangerous in any way for him to pound the window? Yes, it is. And I chose to roll down the window, knowing that he could probably throw something out, but still getting back to my action phase. And then, what comes next? So Crystal, being prepared for consequences. So the unexpected consequences were that he was going to pound on his window. I didn't think about that. So action, and then the next phase. So results. So here I am, and I'm sitting in a car with a young man that's no longer pounding on the window, but is looking out the window, chatting playfully with the officer. I am no longer being pounded on by the back of my seat. And the officer realizes that I was obviously in some distress and had some distraction going on in my vehicle. And the officer took my papers, looked them over, and gave me a warning. And so I felt pretty darn good about the results of that, both for Kate, both for my client that was in the car, because he got a chat with an officer and he got a sticker, and he was happy. But before I left, before I pulled back on that parking lot, I did a quick rip through all of those cycles. And if you want to go to the next step, the next slide, Crystal. Oh, shoot. Go back, sorry, to the full radar. I thought I put one more in there. Back, back. Yeah. So I did a quick recognition. My environment is okay. I looked around, I assessed what I had around me. I realized I had a balloon, which he loves balloons. Gave him the balloon, decided to give him the balloon, gave him the balloon, he immediately started blowing on the balloon and not pounding on the back of my seats. I recognized my time to get back on the road, and by then I was able to pull back on the road. Now, this interaction was over the course of about 10 minutes. But by the time I got home, he was talking with his parents as much as he could verbalize about meeting the police officer. And I was able to explain to the parents, very thoroughly what had gone on. And so my checkout with the parents was pretty, I didn't get a call made to my supervisor. My son said that he got pulled over by a cop with his support staff. And so things turned out pretty good for me in using proactive interaction. So can you kind of, looking at the proactive interaction cycle, I think we gave you a bigger handout about that. And you can take a look at it yourself. But it is, and my camera's not going to show what it looks like because it doesn't, but we gave you a bigger handout about yourself. With proactive interaction, it's perfect for things that you're doing right now when you're doing like PHQ-9 calls. It's something that you can, you start with recognition with maybe the tone of voice or the receptivity of the client. You go into the assessment, which is you listening to their maybe receptiveness of your survey decision. Am I going to do the survey now? Or are they saying, I want to talk to my doctor about this before I do it? Whatever, action, and then results. And each time you go through that, you're improving your own proactive interaction in sometimes what is a routine situation. So any questions about proactive interaction?
No, I think that was I think the slides and your examples put it into place pretty well.
Well, I have several. I have a grosser one where it didn't turn out so good that I could share with you, but I'd rather give you the one where the results were best for everyone.
Okay.
I'll save that one for the crisis cycle. How about that?
Okay.
All right. Could we get back to our, there we go. Thanks, Chris. Look, she's so good at this. So we're also going to talk a little bit today about skills and what skills are, because in some instances of your work, you're teaching skills. In many instances of your work, you're teaching skills. So there's the Webster's dictionary definition: ability coming from one's knowledge, practice, aptitude, etc., to do something well. What I like to talk about are skills. When I like to define skills in the context of teaching, I say that skills are tasks or behaviors that are learned by the patient through modeling, repetition, and practice. So I focus on that practice in that Webster's dictionary when I'm thinking about what a skill is, right? Next slide. Oops. So skills are important. They allow our patients to navigate your home, community, and school. Life skills, these are some different community skills. Life skills allow patients to grow in independence while caring for their own needs. There's a lot of examples of life skills that can be taught to patients. Maybe one of those might be tracking and keeping appointments. It's a great life skill to teach to patients for self-management. Social skills allow patients to foster appropriate relationships with peers, family, and community members. So sometimes you may be training on a social skill. Emotional skills allow a patient to regulate their own behavior without someone present. So that might be a relaxation exercise that they can independently practice. And then communication skills allow patients to express their feelings, thoughts, wants, and needs appropriately and respectfully. And appropriately is a naughty word for me, so I'm going to have to remember to check that in the slide, because I don't think that or correct that in the slide, because I think the best word for that is assertively and respectfully, right? We all too often use that word appropriate and inappropriate, right? And assertively and respectively is really what I talk more about when it comes to communication skills. So I am actually really, that's a word that's begun to be a trigger word for me. So skills are everywhere. Here's just some examples of skills. So there might be solving a conflict with a sibling is most likely going to be a social skill and an emotional skill, right? Making a new friend may be an emotional skill and actually a community skill, right? Making a friend and being able to play with them in the park safely. A lot of times skills are a combination of types of skills. That's what I'm saying, is every skill doesn't fit into a neat type, but they are absolutely used everywhere. Me trying to make eye contact with you through Zoom effectively because I've got you guys on two screens. It's driving me nuts. There's a skill, right? Working on it. Next slide, Crystal. So this is a slide, why it says, why are skills difficult to teach to some children? But really it's why are skills difficult to teach to some patients? And it is not necessarily the difference between a child and adult in skill development. A lot of times the same simple skills are really complex behaviors that have to be broken down into small steps. Kid, adult, doesn't matter if we're teaching to color, teaching someone to color within the lines, or if we're helping someone to fill out a form, teaching them to fill out a form for a benefit potentially. Patients don't always come from environments that have the time, knowledge, or patience to teach skills, and they're used to failing. That may be that they were under-supported in their education, or it may be that those skills were not modeled in the home. So money management skills, or even, like impulse control skills. The parent that always just let the kid grab the candy off the rack. That might be the same adult that we're sitting here in front of talking to about managing their sugar intake to support their diabetes, right? And the other thing why skills are difficult to teach to some people is because people that have had struggles learning skills are often overcorrected, told they're doing it wrong too much, or they're over prompted. So they're told and told and told to do something without the appropriate skills to plan that response, and they get frustrated, so it blocks learning, adult learning in particular. So I'm going to give you a few key vocabulary words, because we're going to learn about something that is intended to provide the appropriate amount of prompting to learn a skill without over prompting or over correcting. All right. And we need these vocabulary words in order to understand this. Have you ever heard of least to most prompt hierarchy?
No, I haven't.
Okay. All right, so these are our vocabulary words. So a cue is a natural indicator that a patient should perform a skill. So a cue might be that for us, we go to a strange restaurant and our plates are put in front of us and no utensils are provided. Our cue is maybe in Ethiopian culture, we don't eat with utensils. You know, we eat more with our hands and by scooping, right? So a cue also might be I get my hands dirty playing outside. And that cue, dirty hands, is a natural indicator that the patient should perform a skill, wash their hands, right? Yeah. All right. So a prompt is something we artificially do to tell a patient that they should perform a skill. So a prompt is us saying, at whatever level of directness, Johnny, it would be great if we went inside and washed your hand, or Johnny, we need to go inside and wash your hands now that you've played in the sandbox, right? Or a prompt might be that, you know, Mrs. Jones, I'm calling to check on your meds, or I'm calling to check in with you to see if you had ordered your medications. We talked about it at your last visit, and I'm just making certain that you did follow through on that. A prompt, an artificial indicator, rather than a cue, which might be that prescription slip that's still sitting on her kitchen counter. All right. And then objective, obviously a desired behavior or a task that's the focus of a skill. I think that's pretty solid word. That's what we use objective for, what we're shooting for. Reinforcement is an affirmation that the patient is performing a skill correctly. Reinforcements come in all shapes and sizes. Correction is an indication that the patient is not performing a skill correctly. All right. And then generalization is when Tommy realizes that when I'm in the sandbox, I need to wash my hands. And maybe after some prompting, he realizes before he eats, he needs to wash his hands. And then maybe Johnny realizes after he does painting, he has to wash his hands. So generalization is when that skill starts to spread to different environments and situations. All right, this is our vocab. Go ahead, Chris. All right, so this is what I call, and most people call, or what is called, not what I call, it's not trademark, Megan, the least to most prompt hierarchy. So it is a pyramid of support that's extended to someone, increasing levels of support that are given to someone to achieve an objective or skill. So give me, one of you, give me a skill that a patient would need to practice to take care of their health.
Checking their blood sugars.
Checking their blood sugars. Great. Excellent. Excellent.
Watching their diet.
Watching their diet. You know, Alberto's is much more specific and measurable than yours, even though it doesn't contain all of the SMART goal elements, Crystal. So I'm going to go with Alberto's today, if that's okay.
Love it.
Shut her down, Alberto. I'm kidding. So let's start at the top with what a cue is. Remembering that a cue is something in the natural environment that tells people that they should complete a skill. And this skill is take their blood sugar, right? Mm-hmm. So what would the cue be in the natural environment?
I feel like a biological one, maybe if they have like a low blood sugar and they're feeling like shaky or sweaty, maybe that'd be a cue to check it, or they're having some of those physical symptoms, or it's like a certain time before they eat or after.
Absolutely, absolutely. So the conclusion of a meal or the planning of a meal might be a cue. There are a lot of cues, aren't there, to taking your blood? It's tough. And so minding all those cues is very, very tough. So if I were working with a client on if I were working with a client and I believed that they only need cueing, or I was starting out with cueing for blood pressure, I would make a simple list of times or occasions that their blood sugar should be taken, right? So baseline blood sugar in the morning, prior to meal, and then of course the well, I don't want to put that in my thing, prior to meal, and then post 30 minutes insulin injection, right? Because those are our three major cues. We want to teach our clients about all their body cues, but sometimes still they go ignored. So this indirect verbal cue, writing down those three times might be a little more effective. So a direct verbal cue would be for you, Alberto, to cue them directly, or in a virtual environment to tell them it's time to take your blood sugar. Or in a virtual environment, it could be a timer on their phone that says, take your blood sugars, or calculate your insulin for your lunch meal, right? Which are telling them that their cues, their indirect verbal cues, are coming, or their indirect verbal prompting is coming up. So that may be some gestural or direct verbal. There's also what's called gestural cueing, which in a real-time environment, let's say we are assisting a client in filling out their medication, filling in their medication box. So a gestural cue might be for you to gesture toward the medication box that it's time for them to do that when they are maybe talking about something else or distracted, whatever. A modeling cue, in the gestural modeling starts into assistance rather than prompting, right? Prompting is less, assistance is heavier. Modeling cue might be you taking out the specific medication and showing them put one in each of these. And by putting one in each of those pill, the pill openings, and then taking the next medication and modeling. Light physical might be you assisting them in doing it, and maybe just opening the medicine caps, right? Oh, and I lost our analogy, sorry. Go back. Gestural modeling for someone with, no, not you, Crystal. Modeling for someone that's asked to take their blood sugar might be you showing them how to do it and confirming that they understand how to do that skill, right? Multiple times, potentially. Light physical is you actually helping them with manipulating their blood pressure their blood sugar equipment, like maybe just taking the strip out of the jar for the patient because they have some limited mobility. Direct physical would be when you were doing all of the steps pretty much for them with their cooperation. And so when we're talking about prompting and assistance, you can see that prompting is the least to most hierarchy. So cueing is at the least and direct physical is at the most. I wanted to remind you that patients sometimes are overcorrected or overprompted, right? Causing them frustration and blocking learning. That is the reason that we utilize a least to most prompt hierarchy. Can you think of an example where a repeated direct verbal cue might cause anxiety or frustration in someone?
Yeah. because they're being told what to do over and over again. I feel like, and especially if a patient has that going on at home, that's the last thing they want. They want a different approach where they can express or not.
Yeah, yeah. I can give you an example. My husband doesn't like it when I ask him to pick up his glasses off he keeps all of his sunglasses on my counter. If I ask him to do that more than once, I better be ready to just go ahead and do it, because he doesn't like that. He gets frustrated. No, that's a great, that's a great example. There's also a lot of examples where prompting is only used and assistance is not considered. And so it's important for you when discussing objectives of the care that you're providing to your patients with their behavioral health provider to kind of get a sense of how much support will this patient need to learn a new relaxation skill. Like, will they require me to help them maybe place their feet on the floor or sit more comfortably in a chair because they have limited mobility? Or do I just need to model it for their patient? It's fully bodied. Do I need to say, what do you think, going up to indirect verbal, what do you think about doing a relaxation exercise right now before we get started putting together your med box? Because, or before we get started checking your blood pressure logs, something like, or blood sugar or blood pressure logs. So I'm thinking about a patient that just said, I only get anxiety when I'm asked to check my blood pressure, and she gets asked to check her blood pressure every day. And so so I was thinking of that patient and wondering what kind of cueing she might need, so to master that complex skill of taking her blood pressure every day. Because for her, she's so resistant to it. All right, Chris, you want to head to the next slide? Okay, so this is just basic again about prompting and assistance. Prompting is non-intrusive and unthreatening. Prompting uses specific words. You use the same words when you're prompting. You do not vary unless you understand that that patient does not understand a word that you're saying. So you should use short, specific words for prompting, and it requires processing time. So just because somebody doesn't react immediately by grabbing their test kit, when you say, oh, it's time for us to take your blood sugar, you told me that you just ate, let's take your blood sugar while you're here. Don't expect them to grab for it immediately. Give them processing time, 10 seconds, right? Lots. Assistance is intrusive and hands-on. It often ignores processing time, so you're supposed to slow it down. The slow down is most often accomplished by some specific wording. So some specific wording like asking to touch. Mrs. Jones, may I get your glucometer out of your bag with your medications in it? Mrs. Jones, okay, we have your glucometer out. The first thing that we need to do is load a test strip into your glucometer, so that or a narrative or script of how you're performing the skill. And so assistance isn't that you just grab them and you do it. Assistance, you turn into the narrator of the story, and you still abide by that ask to touch. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So can you give me an example of a time, can you think of a time that assistance and not prompting would need to be used with a patient?
I feel like if they're working with something that can hurt themselves, like if they're using scissors or something, maybe that's like a skill they want to be able to do a craft project, and they need I think that's where the modeling would be more helpful, and then maybe direct touch. So I think that's one example. I think if Anything, yeah. Sorry.
Anything safety oriented. And that's
Yeah.
why, like filling out a medication box could
Yeah.
become, absolute. You may need to provide some direct physical assistance because that's safety oriented. If we get 2 of the pink pill, Alice might shrink. And if we get, one too many of the purple pill, she might grow to 10 feet tall. And so there's a health and safety threat there.
Mhm.
I mean, not that that really happens in psychotropics, but I guess for recording this, I shouldn't have given an Alice in Wonderland example. All right, next one, Crystal. All right, so this is collaborative problem solving, and it is a technique that you can actually take about a week-long training on. It's pretty amazing. It comes from a researcher in Oregon that used collaborative problem solving initially with youth in inpatient settings, but found a way to adapt the technique or the theory to youth parents with difficult youth in the community. So collaborative problem solving kind of functions on the idea that there are times to plan together and there are times to ignore the problem or the behavior, and there are times that you must impose adult will. All right. The plan B is the collaborative problem solving method, is creating the plan together. Plan A and Plan C are part of collaborative problem solving too, but they are kind of the guide rails for us. So I'm going to tell you a story about collaborative problem solving. And then I would like for you to give an example of a conflict with a client that might be resolved by collaborative problem solving, okay? All right, and there's a reason there's a tractor on this side. So, so I am working with a 7-year-old, and I get the pleasure of spending 4 hours with him in the community a couple times a week. And one of the things that we enjoy most in our time together is actually our time on the road, seeing the different red, green, orange, blue, silver, yellow tractors. But his favorite color of tractor is green. So we had an exceptional session the day before, where he practiced some amazing community inclusion skills, did some emotional regulation skills in a really stressful environment for him, which Walmart is a stressful environment for him. So we did he really knocked it out of the park with all the skills that we were practicing. And we played a game together, and he didn't get mad when I won, which most of the time I let him win. All right. So, so the plan was for our day was to practice our skills and then go and see a tractor up in real life at a tractor dealership. So that was our plan for the day. We had created that plan together at the end of the day prior with Mom, but we always practice our skills. So we started out our session practicing our skills. So our plan, usually practicing our skills didn't go so very well that day. I had to spend a lot of my time actually grabbing his hand or imposing adult will to keep him from running into dangerous areas. And that was very unusual for him that day. I also, he had some mimicry that he did from something that his father said that was offensive and that I had to correct him on a lot. He wasn't taking correction, and you can't clamp your hand over their mouth. That doesn't help. That would be overcorrection. And we were not doing a good job with not using that phrase. So we were coming to the end of our 2-hour session that day, and I had planned our route and our activities so that we would come last by the tractor shop, because my radar told me that if we drove first by the tractor shop, it would be a hell day, because all I'd have to hear is, I want to go see the tractors now. I want to go see the tractors now. But now I was locked in, and I had to drive by the tractor shop to get home. So the child and I's plan was plan B, to go to the tractor shop. We had created that plan in full times of calm and full IQ level. So I felt, and this is a bad application of collaborative problem solving. Sometimes those are the best. I thought, you know what? I got to hold to my plan for this kid. I got to hold to what I promised him. So we stopped at the tractor shop. He would not hold my hand in the parking lot. He climbed on several tractors, and he was a little clumsy, so he needed some assistance at times. It was the most, probably hair-raising, one of the most hair-raising fun things that I've ever done with a child. It took me 35 minutes from the time we were supposed to leave to transition him into the car. Luckily, I was able to do so with minimal physical assistance. I kind of bribed him into the car eventually by telling him that his mom and that his grandma was at his house, and we had to go see his grandma, which was true, because I had called mom because I was 35 minutes late. Let's just be real and honest here. I probably could have chose a plan A in that instance, right? And then when the child was in calmer times again, we could have recreated our plan B to go to the tractor dealership and have fun. I made a mistake. I chose plan B. And so it's important to know that sometimes there are times to impose adult will during crisis or safety threat, or when the behaviors are going to escalate further and there's might be some dangers in the environment. And there's times that you can ignore the problem. Of course, never if there's a safety threat, but you can choose your battles, and you could always, say, hey, I know I asked you not to do this. You did it anyway. Let's talk about it later, right? I know I asked you not to run out of the car as soon as I parked the car at the tractor dealership. We can talk about it later, instead of immediately going and imposing adult will, right? So this is a really short intro to something that might be useful. Can you think of a time that having a plan A, a plan B, a plan B with a client might fall through, and you might have to use another arm of this collaborative problem solving method?
I think with plan B, I think you can start off with being calm and having full IQ, but it doesn't always end that way. So I feel like if you can't keep those two factors during the whole plan, then you're going to have to switch.
Right. And if I would have trusted my gut, I would have known that I was not completely calm and I was not completely working from my whole brain, was I? I was working from, I promised this kid. I promised this kid. All right, so the next thing that we're going to get into is the crisis cycle. It's 8:55. We're going to go to 10. So I'm giving us our 5-minute break. Okay?
Okay.
All right. Thanks for stopping the video, Chris. Oh, Crystal, do you want to stop the recording or can I? The point where the young man would open the door for others without being told. And so if you're documenting progress in your notes, you might be able to say, you know, I only had to directly, I only had to give Ms. Jones one direct verbal cue to, you know, get her pillbox out, whatever, or that today, and she in the past has required, you know, a direct assistance. So just something, you know, you can talk about the changes in the ways that a client is displaying a skill in your notes. And that's a really important, important measurement of what you're doing with the client. And so, yeah, just those are some keywords you might want to use in your documentation as well. So, all right, part 6, crisis response. My favorite. I had the next slide, Chris, when you're back. I had the, wait, hide this one. Don't look at it, Alberto. I had the privilege of working crisis for years and being involved in many crises as a paraprofessional. So first thing I want to ask you is, what is your definition of crisis?
Safety related, emotional turmoil, just an extreme situation. I don't know how to describe it really.
Okay. How do you know how your agency defines crisis?
Right now, all I really learned about crisis, it's more of the suicide, of they're at risk of hurting or harming themselves, at risk for suicide, extreme emotional, like turmoil, if they come in very emotional, things like that.
Okay, great. So that lines up pretty nicely with the definition on the next slide. Really, because in our industry, there are really, go ahead to the next slide, Chris, sorry. In our industry, a crisis is really an immediate threat of harm to self or others. And that could be a real or perceived threat of harm. So that's very consistent with what is the worst outcome in our industry, which is suicide. Let's be it's very sober, but that is the worst outcome that we can have in our industry. So crisis, of course, can be brought on by physical or emotional stress. You were talking about, you know, heightened emotions. It can also be brought on by medication interactions. It can also be brought on by injury. Even, you know, the crisis can be brought on by all types of stress. So examples of a severe crisis are a suicide threat, a self-injurious behavior, running, like running away or running into a dangerous area, okay? Or physical injury, so something that's going to cause physical injury, or someone is physically injured. Those are all crises in our definition. So in a crisis, options don't feel very obvious to our patients. They're locked into one of those 3 core, they can be locked into one of those 3 core reactions: fight, flight, or freeze. And to some degree, we have a response to crisis too. We hope that in talking about the stages of crisis and things you can do to intervene with crisis, that you're not limited to that fight, flight, or freeze in your work. So in crisis, skill levels, and so right now we're talking about patients and we are talking about us. In crisis, skill levels decrease. Our ability to reason, do things like compromise and make decisions. our ability to communicate, our hearing actually decreases. The way that we can express ourselves, it gets like this. The way that we express ourselves can get blocked. They may not be able to speak as clearly or communicate as clearly as before. And then there's a whole body thing going on. Whether we like it or not, all these things are definitely happening in us. Blood pressure is going up, heart rate's going up, respiration's going up, adrenaline levels are going up, and endorphin levels are going up. So both of us, our patient and us, are in this crisis together. So that is one reason why skills levels decrease. That's one reason why we teach this crisis cycle. So if we can go to the next slide, Chris. All right, so this crisis cycle is a model of behavior that you can use these are the typical stages a person may go through under stress, physical stress or emotional stress. It recognizes that both you and your patient are likely going through the cycle together, but each level it asks from you a specific response to help effectively de-escalate wherever you are at in the crisis cycle. So it gives you, Alberto, a skill to deploy when you know what phase your client is in the crisis cycle. All right, next slide, Chris. All right, so this is the crisis cycle in short. So personal best, and we spend time in all of these areas. Personal best, cool. You keep doing your response, what you should be doing if someone is at their personal best. Keep doing what you're doing, but keep your radar on, right? Because something could bring someone into phase one, where there's stimulation or a trigger. Your response to that warming up from stimulation or trigger is to try to remove the stress or the stimuli, potentially by redirecting the client to a relaxation exercise, or if the stimuli is something in their environment, maybe changing locations for that client, okay? So removal of the client from the immediate stress or the stimuli. There's escalation, means we're going up. So we can't remove the stimulus, we can't get the client out of the area. We might have to offer options and set limits. So offering options and setting limits is key, because we're focusing in on giving the client choices. They may have reduced reasoning, but we give them choices that are our choices, all right? Offering options and setting limits. The setting limits are that these are our choices, we're giving them to you. So right now, you seem very agitated. Would you like to, you said that you didn't want to try a relaxation exercise right now. Would you like me to leave you to yourself for 10 to 15 minutes to regroup? Or would you like to go ahead and continue working on what we were working on? And they may say, continue working on what we're working on, but the escalation. So they choose to continue on what we're working on, and the crisis gets very, so when the crisis gets hot, the least amount of verbal interaction necessary for safety and physical interaction necessary for safety is key. That might mean that you're not talking with them, that you're sitting quietly with them, that you're observing their body language, and that you are just simply monitoring for safety, right? Once you get to the crisis phase, it's very likely that you have to complete the other 3 phases. The client will definitely complete the other 3 phases. Let's say we were able to sit quietly and you start to notice maybe their tense muscles start to loosen. Maybe they pick up a magazine and start flipping it around, flipping through it in your office. Maybe you notice that their breath rate is going down. The most important thing to do after that is to provide a structured cooling off period. It is not to go back to whatever task you were trying to accomplish, but to provide a structured cooling off period. So that might be where you say to your client, it seems like you're relaxing a little bit. Why don't you go ahead and continue to look at the magazines? Can I find you more? What types of magazines do you like? Letting them de-escalate. After they de-escalate and they kind of recover to some degree, they begin into a stabilization period. It's a welcome back, you know, I'm glad you're feeling better. Maybe you've stopped crying, or maybe you've stopped ranting and you're able to leave my office. But you need to be actively listening. So they may begin to communicate with you, and just actively listen, no confrontation, supportive communication. Active listening is something that all paraprofessionals do, but that might be the only thing you can do at that point with the client. Usually at that point in a clinic, our clients leave. When it is a community-based crisis, or a crisis where there may be a change in the level of care, after crisis, that post-crisis really still requires observation and support. And so that observation and support, again, active listening, least amount of interaction necessary for safety. Can I get you a glass of water? Just basic supports, okay? So so I don't want to imply showing it like a table like this, that all of these phases happen, because you can short circuit the crisis cycle. And so we're going to talk about that on the next slide, I think. Yes, awesome. All right, so this is the crisis cycle arranged in kind of more of an arc. I think you can see that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so it has the phases, it has the name of the phase, and it has a suggested response, okay? So the cool thing is, keep doing what you're doing, or these arrows kind of run back and forth. I have to explain that they don't just run one way, but they kind of run back and forth. So we're at our personal best. A stimulus or a trigger warms our client up, and we remove them from the stress and stimuli, but that doesn't mean that we go up to offering options and setting limits. If we were effective at removing them from the stress or stimuli, we should move across to the crisis cycle and go into the stabilization phase, where we actively listen. So we might say something like, you seem more comfortable in this office. Is that helpful for you? May not want to go into why they were triggered unless you're tasked with skills around that specific trigger, but you actively listen. It's possible for you to then do a brief period of observation and support, because they likely are not completely drained, and then go back to assume that a client is back to their baseline, and then start your work again in that personal best sphere. So these responses, like offering options and setting limits, I said, you know, you can either stay here in my office for 15 minutes and relax, or we can continue working on what you'd like to work on. And they say, you know what, I'd like to work on that. Yeah, I would really like to work on that. And you think, okay, let's give them some structured cooling off too. So we're going across the mode, we're getting them some structured cooling off. Just say, hey, I do have to make a few copies of some things, and I'll grab you a glass of water. If you'd like one, I'll be back in 5 or 10 minutes. You come back, And that structured cooling off transitions to active listening if they have something that they'd like to tell you about their experience. Brief period of observation of support, and then you're back to personal best, and you can work on that skill or that objective that you have. So this crisis cycle, I have worked in this when I've been able to effectively, offering options and setting limits is my favorite skill out of this, because going from personal best to the reaction to a stimulus or trigger can happen so fast, and we're often in situations where we can't remove the stimulus or trigger, that offering options and setting limits is one of my favorite things to do. So sometimes I offer options and I set limits pretty quickly, to be honest, and then I move back through these structured cooling off, active listening, observation, and support quickly, you know, and back into phase 0, personal best. So that is one of my favorite things to also see in a note, where as a paraprofessional is redirecting behaviors. I offered Ms. Jones the option to take her blood sugar now or to wait to the conclusion of our visit to record her blood sugar in her diary. She chose to wait to the conclusion of our visit. So structured cooling off, active listening, observation, and support. Move on to your next objective. Then, and then your return, hopefully she'll stay in her personal best when it comes time again to take your blood sugar, right? Before your visit's over. So have you ever felt like you've gone through this cycle, Alberto?
I guess I have one question. Like with the crisis as like the least amount of interaction necessary for safety, is that safety for like you or the client necessarily, or both?
Always both. Always
Okay.
both. Yes.
So
Very good.
is this where, I guess would, I don't know, is this where like, is it if a client gets physical, like, or tries to run, is this where that least amount of interaction would be, you know, that's when you go, it changes to more, the most
Right.
interaction needed?
So in honesty, yeah, the least amount of interaction necessary for safety. If a client is running out into a busy street, the least amount of interaction necessary for safety is to stop the client from running out into the street, right? Yeah. Don't put yourself in front of a bus, okay? Your safety always comes first. But if there is a way that you can keep the client from running out into the street, then it's most likely a very easy incident report to write up and say why you put your hands on your client.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's a policy. An agency policy doesn't cover everything that can happen. It just covers what should be happening in the normal course of business, right? Yeah. Quick run through on this crisis cycle with one of my favorite young men. I worked 30 hours a week with a young man. He was 12 years old, and he had a history of explosive tantrums, getting physical with other workers, as well as running. So there were some, there's some radar that was always going on in my head with this young man. If you can, you know, I think you can understand that. So one day I picked this young man up in my vehicle, and we had a very chatty and uneventful car ride to the center that we were working at, that we would be going to for a group. So I was actually one-on-one support to this young man during this group, even though he was included in the group activities. The group activity involved making macaroni and toast and peanut butter toast for a snack. That was the group activity that we were getting ready for. I realized and directly cued my young man that to participate in the group activity that we would need to go to the bathroom and wash our hands. So instantly I know that there's a stress and stimuli there. One of my young man's other goals was to toilet himself, and he required some direct assistance in toileting. So he did not want to go to the bathroom because the bathroom meant that his skill was going to get practiced. And in the bathroom, we had to practice washing our hands. And in washing our hands in the past, he had eaten a large quantity of soap. So I knew that I had to. So I said, I knew that the seriousness was going up. So I said, you know, Camden, would you like to participate in the group activity? If you would like to participate in the group activity, we will need to use hand sanitizer or go to the bathroom. That was my first mistake. I didn't offer him an option that was mine. We could have just used hand sanitizer. Probably would have been a little bit better outcome, but he chose. I offered options and set limits, and he chose to go to the restroom. So phase 3, we're in the bathroom. I have to ensure that he stays in the restroom and doesn't come out with any garments undone. But I stay within the restroom with him. He decides that he needs to use the restroom and go potty. That was our word. And he emerges from the stall with a large amount of feces on his hands. So here is a young man with a large amount of feces on his hands that needs to wash his hands with soap that he's probably going to eat. I do not want feces in his mouth. I would prefer to have soap only in his mouth. So I directly intervene to try to help him wash his hands. He proceeded to spin around backwards as I was washing his hands with him, singing the happy birthday song, and stick a finger of poop and soap in my mouth. At that point, I literally called my supervisor. I left the bathroom. I stayed at the locked bathroom door, and I literally called my supervisor and said, I need help. I'm either going to blow up or I'm going to throw up. I was in that crisis cycle with this young man. So another staff member came in, assisted in de-escalation, completing his favorite staff member came in, got him to wash his hands, then got him to sanitize his hands, got me something to spit out. I was removed from working with him at that time because sometimes that happens. And she gave him a large bin of Legos to sort by color, which he loved to do. He loved doing that, and then building things with each color. It was kind of cute. Once he had been sorting his Legos for about 30 minutes, I re-entered the situation, and I was talking and interacting with him about the color of the Legos, something not related to the incident, and then stayed with him through the period of time that it took him to get to post-crisis. I walked him out into my car, and he passed out in his car seat on the way home. And he was a 12-year-old, but he was tiny. And yeah, so anyway, so there is an example of the crisis cycle not working, because sometimes it just doesn't work. You can't remove the stimulus. But also think about this crisis cycle that you're going through. You are going through with a team, and that team helps you keep your respiration, your adrenaline levels, everything measured out. Because if you wanted to hear adrenaline in my voice, it was, you have to take him now. I'm either going to blow up or I'm going to throw up, right? There was true adrenaline in my system, and I needed to remove myself. and have someone else help support my client. So that happens too. So I gave my worst case scenario. I didn't die of E. coli or anything. We worked together for 6 more months. He and I, we eventually conquered hand washing while only eating 2 pumps of foam soap, which was a lot better than the pump, and just in his mouth that he'd like to do before. And I feel very proud of him for his work that he did with me. And I'm very thankful for getting to work with a young man like that. So, any questions about this crisis?
No,
Cycle.
no, I don't. Sorry, I'm trying to look at the faces and see.
It's okay. Well, just notice when you go all the way through that crisis cycle, notice this dashed line called the baseline. It is a very, very common error for people to see someone in post-crisis who is drained and try to assume that they are at their baseline, when the reality is they're below their baseline. And so it's very important to thoroughly evaluate someone before returning them to a personal best. And this young man that I worked with, he was drained by the time I got him out to the car. So I watched him in my rearview mirror and thought about the wonderful conversation I was going to have privately with Mom on the way home. So yeah. I got my wits back about me too. All right. Next slide. All right. So just a reminder that there is an interaction in the baseline, stimulation, trigger, and stabilization phases. Those proactive interaction styles build relationships by having a functional or positive interaction, offering options, setting limits, support and observation, active listening, structured cooling off, removal of a stressor stimuli. So even in the stimulation, trigger, and stabilization phases, choosing responses carefully can avoid dysfunctional or negative interactions. So you have to still, choosing responses carefully can avoid going up the cycle, basically, is what I'm trying to say there. Incidents usually happen in the escalation and de-escalation phases. They actually don't often happen in the crisis point. In the crisis point, because the focus is completely on safety and maintaining safety, most of the time it's when people assume that, or when people are de-escalating and you try to put a demand on them or put a stressor on them, that they re-trigger and that an incident that you have to report will happen. Similarly, in the escalation phase, failing to offer options and setting limits and saying, well, what do you want to do, right? And she says, well, I want to freaking not take my Lantus anymore and blah, 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 those 2 phases, those are where the most incidents happen. And crisis really occurs at the point when people are reacting to things around them, or they're reacting to feelings of frustration, anxiety, and tension. It's really important that you're responding to their reactions rather than reacting to them. That's why proactive interaction and these possible responses are the key. Turning possible incidents into interactions is the primary goal, because it's like one of those mini conflict and working phases in our relationship building. It all goes back to a little mini conflict and then working resolution. So that's why I love proactive crisis. So what Roberto needs to do in a crisis, Alberto, why do I keep calling you Roberto? Sorry. I have a lot of friends named Roberto. One of them is my favorite prime rib chef too, so take it as a compliment if you can. So first of all, know your scope of duties and stay within them, and know your agency's expectation for your response. It's usually some kind of report to your supervisor. It may be a call for backup, it's usually a report to your supervisor, a call to a backup staff member. And there's often, it says documentation if appropriate. There's often documentation connected to a crisis, unless it's a clinical crisis where it's the therapist's responsibility to document that clinically. See what I mean? There may be some other documentation, whereas this is the therapist's responsibility to document that clinically. All right, next one, Chris. All right. So we did this one, right? Yeah, no restraints to patients. This is where we gotta get to injury. Go to, there we go. So if an injury is suspected, inspect the area. If it's appropriate, have a second party witness the inspection of an injury, especially if it involves any changing of the wearing of someone's clothes. So if there's an injury that a little boy perhaps, or a little girl shows you and lifts up their shirt and shows you, let them know, I would like to take a look. I will take a look at that if you would like me to, but I'm going to have someone else come in that can take care of, help me take care of you if there's something serious. Okay, so just make sure you have a second party there to witness the inspection. Even if you just lean around your cubicle and say, hey Mike, I just need you to pop in over here, and there's an injury on a client and I would like for you to take a look at it because it involves rolling up their shirt. So adult or child, doesn't matter, have someone else there. If there's a visible or apparent injury, perform basic first aid if you are trained. Notify supervisor, and if you are basic first aid trained and you are trained in CPR and AED, or CPR and AED usage, you know when to call emergency medical services. So call EMS. Next one, Crystal. All right, so we talked a little bit about running before. This is a really dangerous behavior, adult or a child. The thing that you want to ask yourself, are they taking space or taking off? So I've known clients that when they begin to escalate, they just leave their therapist's office and go back out into the waiting room. And so, ask yourself, are they taking space or taking off? If they leave line of sight and they are in crisis, call 911 and your supervisor. If you can keep eyes on them and there are not any safety concerns, call your supervisor. If there are any safety concerns at all, call 911 and your supervisor. So the first case, if you can keep eyes on them and there are not safety concerns, call your supervisor. The only real time that I've ever used that instead of calling 911, because they are running and I keep my eyes on them, I stay on the line with 911, because I'm not big enough to tackle some people. Just gonna say that. I had a kid that was hiding under the bleachers in a gym, and he was running back and forth under the bleachers. And I don't know if you've noticed, but I'm a sort of thick lady, and I couldn't squeeze back there. And they were running around under the bleachers during a basketball game that was one of our positive outings. I just called my supervisor and I said, look, we're not having the best time at the basketball game. He's running around the bleachers. I can't get him out. It doesn't look like he's going to get hurt. I'll wait till the game's over. Call mom. We're just taking a little extra time, transitioning between activities. and, you know, I got him out. That's the only time. Otherwise, I'm keeping an eyes on them. I'm possibly running and I'm on the phone with 911. So. Verbal threats, if a patient threatens to hurt themselves, you must report it to your supervisor. If someone else threatens you or the patient, you should feel free to remove yourself from the situation. Of course, taking the patient with you, if they're with you, and report to your supervisor. Again, if you're threatened by your patient, report to your supervisor and maintain the least amount of interaction necessary for the client and your own physical safety. So what is the verbal threats? What's the basic rule for verbal threats?
Like if to report to your supervisor, or
Yes, that's the thing that's common with everything. Okay. If you can remove yourself from the situation, great. That's can happen in a community, and I've had that happen in a community. Been threatened in the community by a patient's family member. That still has to be documented because that was contact with the client outside, okay? And should be documented. Maybe not to the client's case file, but in an incident report. So when does the crisis end? So we already talked about the fact that we get down into that area of the crisis cycle where we are, what did I do here? Okay, sorry. Where we are post-crisis, we're probably below our baseline. The client's probably below their baseline because they're post-crisis and drained. One of the reasons why it says call your supervisor with this is because of safety. One of the reasons why so many of these situations say call your supervisor are because of getting backup and getting instruction. But when the crisis ends, you may need to debrief with that supervisor. And debriefing is really, really important, not only to avoid like taking on vicarious trauma, which I could be traumatized about hand soap for the rest of my life. I think about him every day. I'm not sure, but I debrief with my supervisor, both to improve what I'm going to do with my client in the future, to kind of break down the crisis cycle as it appeared to me and how I tried to proactively respond. And then I just got to release that. Because sometimes you go home and all of those endorphins are rushing and all of those, adrenaline is still in you. And the best thing to do to slow that down is to re-engage your prefrontal cortex. And that happens through that debriefing process, all right? Because your prefrontal cortex clamps the gate down on the fight, flight, and freeze portion of your brain, right? Mm-hmm. So debrief, debrief, debrief. It helps you not take things home. And even if you don't debrief right after and you feel like you need to debrief, maybe you're questioning yourself or you're frustrated with something that the client did still, or you're not seeing a way to avoid the situation in the future, ask for help from your supervisor, especially if you're taking it home, if that makes sense. Crisis support, you are never working alone, okay? You are never working alone. You should use your chain of command, and you're very lucky because Tori is your commander, your immediate commander. And so if you talk to her, if she's unavailable, you need to know what her backup plan is for you, okay? So that is the good thing, is that you're going to get Tori, and Tori's probably gone through every single one of the situations that you and I have ever gone through, plus. But the bad thing is that that you might have to know who her backup is when there is a crisis, okay, or when you need crisis support. Let's see. And then emergency 911, if you do have to contact emergency services or 911, it's sometimes, if there's another person there, continue to attempt to call your supervisor or program manager. Don't just call the cops and say, oh, the cops will let them know that there's this poor guy out here dealing with this horrible situation, and we'll just let him kind of boil, right? Keep calling your supervisor or program manager. They will come to your aid, or they will send a crisis worker to your rescue, okay? We're always a part of a team, which I love. So going from crisis, like clinical look, a clinical look at crisis, to more of a what would we say, administrative look at crisis. There are a lot of types of incidents that you have to report. These are just a few of them. So have you ever had to report, make an adverse incident report that was an incident of one of these types, Alberto?
Strange reporting failure. No, not yet. Thankfully, no.
Wow, that is awesome. Okay, so death, harm, injury, abuse, harassment, or threat to you or patients. Most likely a reportable incident, not in the clinical file, but in administrative files.
Okay.
Breach of confidentiality, you know, you dump a file folder out in the parking lot, but you think you get everything back. Might have had a few clients' names on there, you got to report yourself. Or you see someone else do it, you have to report them if they are not reporting themselves. That's or an ethical violation. Medication error or loss, that's on your part, most likely, not so much on the client's part. They would report that to their clinician. Anything that involves property damage to client, community, municipal property, property of the clinic, a vehicle accident, whether it is, and this is where I took it one step further, a vehicle accident, whether it is your personal vehicle with a client in it, or a company vehicle that you're driving somewhere and there's an accident. Use of seclusion or restraint, so putting hands on people, is reportable. And seclusion and restraint is a very specific term, but seclusion can also be considered seclusion can also be considered when a child or adult is placed in a room that they do not want to be in. So for a period of time and forced to remain in that room. So just think about that. It's a very broad, it's very specific language, but there's a broad consideration of what seclusion is. Restraint, that one can be restraining someone from stepping out off the curb. You have to most likely report those. And then a reporting failure. Which, that is my example of one time I did see someone drop a considerable amount of client material in a parking lot, and I attempted to assist them in picking up all of that material. I checked in with our compliance officer to see if she had filed a report on herself within the 24-hour period required. She did not, so I had to report a breach of confidentiality, and a reporting failure. Fortunately, I only had to fill out one form. That was the best part. All right, next one, Chris. So when to report, talk to your supervisor immediately. Best to call them and provide an email follow-up to them. Take notes at the scene if necessary. On a notepad, whatever. You and your supervisor will need to meet within 24 hours to complete a reportable incident together, okay? An adverse incident. We didn't get all the language changed on that. But you will have a policy that you have will be trained on. I don't know if you've had any training on your adverse incident policy.
I don't think yet, but I'll ask Tori about it because I'm pretty sure I haven't really.
Yeah, she
I think
probably has a plan on a time to take care of it. But yeah, it's important, very important to know what your policy is. Some agencies ask that all eyewitnesses to the scene be listed. Some agencies ask that each person involved in the incident submit a separate report, so that there's, comparative accounts. But follow your policy because there are tweaks to everyone's policies. So, all right, next one. All right, so do you know what a mandatory reporter is?
Yes.
Sure. Tell me what your take on mandatory reporting is. If
you have a suspicion or proof, or just as long as it's good faith, you should mandatory. You're obligated to report that to the whichever agency handles, because there's it could be for children and adults, like people with special needs, elderly abuse, all that.
Children and adults with disabilities and children and adults of older age. Absolutely, absolutely. Senior, what they call them of older age now rather than seniors.
Oh.
I can't keep up. So have you ever had to make a mandatory report before?
I've had to draft one, yes, but I think after we got more information, my supervisor felt, because I don't know what happened. I don't remember exactly. We drafted it up, but there was a translation problem, so that's what affected us not doing a report, but we made one.
Okay. Well, the important thing to know is that you're a mandatory reporter of abuse or neglect on and off duty. This is a very, very serious obligation. When you're on duty and the incident is occurring, of course, with a client on duty, you need to immediately report it to your supervisor, and they will assist you in contacting child welfare if it's appropriate, or that says child welfare, but it needs to say adult or child protective services. So I know that the first time that I made a mandatory report, I was rather shaken up about what the individual told me. And I will never, ever, ever forget my supervisor being there to support me, being there to help me write my note, because that goes on an incident form too, being there to write my note. And then, and just having that support is wonderful. Now, sometimes it's something where there's an immediate crisis and you're making a mandatory report, and you have to go through that crisis cycle internally, and you may need to debrief on duty or off duty. And that is the key here, is that off duty, you do not need to report to your supervisor, but you still have an obligation to report to child welfare.
Okay.
Child or adult welfare. I mean, sorry, to protective services. So it is, and I have had to make reports specifically to child welfare on family members. So sometimes I gotta tell you again, if I remember my boundaries quiz, that I could explore the gray more often. Except for me, the safety of a child or an adult is never in the gray. That is a black and white ethical issue for me. And so, you know, I have had to make multiple reports across my career, and I do not regret any of those reports. They were founded or unfounded. They were important to capturing the truth of what was going on in the homes of the youth and adults that I was serving. So, Crystal, would you like to share anything about mandatory reporting, especially from the developmental disabilities view?
When in doubt, report. Honestly, it's just safer for you, and it's safer for the client. Working with the disabled population, things can get sticky really easy with their understanding, especially when you have an intellectual disability. Things can get sticky when they become adults and they want to date and what their rights are. It really is, it's just better to report, talk to a supervisor, staff with a supervisor, and make that decision together than to think, oh, this is okay, he understands what I mean, or that's not what they're really trying to do. It's just better always staff. Debrief all the time. When I worked with adolescents, pregnant and parenting teens in Ontario high school, I debriefed with Megan quite frequently. And some of that debriefing actually helped me get through some of the vicarious trauma, but helped me to stop and prioritize. Am I looking at it through my lens, or am I looking at it through their lens from my own history and what they had gone through in the past? So when in doubt, report, reach out, and debrief, no matter what.
Absolutely. And a good supervisor will, I shouldn't say that. For me, part of being a supervisor of paraprofessionals was knowing that they were experiencing a broad array of environments, a broad array of mental health and substance use conditions, as well as developmental disabilities, and that they were working on a wide array of goals and skills with these patients. So for me, just so you know, my phone was, and continues to always be on. And that goes, and people know that if they've worked for me one day, that my phone is on, and I'm happy to talk. And that's just make sure you know who Tori's backup is, and maybe if it's a good time, ask her about how she prefers to be contacted, unless there's a whole different chain, which there might be a whole different chain that you triage these sorts of issues through. But you have to have a way to get immediate support in the situation, in the community that you're in. So when you're in the community, especially. So, all right. Okay, it's 5 minutes till 10. Everybody gets a potty break, and then we're gonna keep going till 4 o'clock. I'm kidding. Okay, so Jen sent you the invite to extend it out 2 more weeks. She's gonna be doing some of the presenting. Crystal's gonna be doing some of the presenting. I might be doing some of the presenting. And our last 2 units, possibly the most exciting, but a lot about your role as your job description and how it fits into the multidisciplinary team at FHS. Okay. And also some discussions of scope, which are super helpful, and then some documentation tips. So how to document effectively. Does that sound good?
Yes.
All right. Hang in there, Alberto. Have a great day. I hope we start your days off well on Tuesdays.
You do, 'cause